The dust-covered horizon swallowed the last rays of the setting sun as Virginia Maxwell's wagon creaked along the barren trail, her knuckles white against the reins while anxiety crawled up her spine like a desert scorpion. The year was 1876, and the Arizona Territory held no mercy for a woman traveling alone, a fact that came crashing down upon her when the first gunshot splintered the wooden seat beside her. Virginia yanked hard on the reins, her chestnut mare rearing in panic. 3 riders emerged from the rocky outcropping ahead, faces obscured by bandanas, hats pulled low. The lead rider's horse charged forward, kicking up clouds of dust that choked her lungs and stung her eyes. "What's a pretty thing like you doing out here all alone?" The man's voice was gravel and whiskey as he circled her wagon, his companions blocking her escape routes. "I'm passing through to Tucson. I have nothing of value," Virginia replied, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Her hand inched toward the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt, her father's parting gift before she'd left St. Louis behind. The leader laughed, a hollow sound that echoed across the empty landscape. "That ain't true. You're the value, sweetheart." They moved with practiced efficiency. One yanked the reins from her grasp, while another grabbed her arm, dragging her roughly from the wagon seat. Virginia's scream tore through the twilight as her feet hit the ground, dust billowing around her skirts. She kicked and clawed, landing a solid strike against her captor's shin, but his grip only tightened, bruising her fair skin through the fabric of her sleeve. "You'll fetch a fine price down in Mexico," the leader sneered, dismounting to inspect his prize. "Feisty ones always do." Virginia spat in his face, earning a backhanded slap that sent stars spinning across her vision. Blood pooled at the corner of her mouth as she struggled against the arms restraining her. "Let her go, or you'll answer to me." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once, deep, steady, and carrying the weight of unmistakable threat. The bandits froze, turning toward the sound as a tall figure emerged from the lengthening shadows, rifle raised and aimed. William Westbrook sat atop his paint stallion like he'd been born there, the dying sunlight glinting off the badge pinned to his leather vest. Even in the fading light, Virginia could see the cold fury in his eyes, blue as a winter sky and just as merciless. "Well, if it ain't the famous Marshal Westbrook," the leader drawled, though his hand hovered over his pistol. "This don't concern you, just collecting some wayward property." The marshal's expression didn't change, but his finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger. "That woman isn't property." "Let her go, I won't ask twice." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant cry of a hunting hawk. Virginia held her breath, aware that her fate balanced on a knife's edge. 3 against 1, Marshal. Even you can't like those odds. William's lips curved into something too dangerous to be called a smile. "You're assuming I came alone." He gestured with his chin, and Virginia noticed for the first time the glint of rifle barrels from the rocks above deputies positioned to rain down hell. The bandit's grip on Virginia loosened, and she seized her chance, twisting away and stumbling toward the marshal's horse. The leader snarled, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion, but William was faster. The crack of his rifle echoed across the desert as the bandit's arm jerked back, his weapon falling into the dust as blood bloomed across his shoulder. "Next one goes through your head," William promised quietly. "All of you, hands where I can see them." Within minutes, his deputies had emerged from their hiding places, binding the cursing outlaws with practiced efficiency. One of them, a weathered man with kind eyes, helped Virginia back to her wagon while the marshal supervised the prisoners. "Miss, you're bleeding," the deputy said, offering her a clean handkerchief. Virginia pressed it to her split lip, watching as William secured the last of the bindings. He moved with confidence and economy, no motion wasted. When he finally approached her wagon, the setting sun haloed his tall frame, turning his sandy hair to molten gold. "Madam," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed at odds with the violence she'd just witnessed. "William Westbrook, U.S. Marshal, are you hurt beyond that lip?" Virginia straightened her spine, refusing to appear weak despite the tremble in her hands. "Virginia Maxwell, I'll survive, Marshal. Thank you for your timely intervention." His eyes traveled briefly over her dusty traveling dress and the small wagon loaded with her worldly possessions. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Maxwell. Traveling alone isn't safe in these parts." "I'm aware of the dangers," she replied with more bravado than she felt. "I have business in Tucson that couldn't wait." William studied her for a long moment, seeming to weigh something in his mind. "Tucson's still a day's ride and night's falling. My men and I are escorting these prisoners to Willow Creek. It's just a few miles ahead. You can find safe lodging there and continue your journey tomorrow." Virginia hesitated, glancing at the bound outlaws being loaded onto their own horses. The thought of continuing alone after dark made her blood run cold, but she'd learned early that accepting help often came with expectations she wasn't willing to meet. As if reading her thoughts, the marshal added, "It's my job to keep folks safe in this territory, Miss Maxwell. Nothing more." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. "Very well, Marshal, I accept your escort to Willow Creek." William nodded once, replacing his hat. "Stay close and keep your derringer handy. These aren't the only predators out tonight." Surprised that he'd noticed her hidden weapon, Virginia gathered her reins. "I always do, Marshal." The small procession moved through the gathering darkness, Virginia's wagon flanked by deputies while the marshal led the way, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the emerging stars. Occasionally, he would glance back, checking on her with a quiet vigilance that made her feel both protected and strangely seen, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Willow Creek appeared as a collection of golden lights against the Inkai desert landscape, a haven of civilization in the wilderness. Though small, the town boasted a main street lined with essential businesses, including the sheriff's office where the prisoners were transferred, a general store, a saloon, and a modest hotel that catered to the stagecoach traffic passing through. Virginia found herself standing before this establishment, her belongings gathered in her arms as William secured her wagon and horse in the livery stable next door. "Mrs. Henderson keeps a clean house," he explained, escorting her to the hotel's entrance. "Tell her Marshal Westbrook sent you. She'll give you a fair price and a hot meal." Virginia nodded, suddenly aware of how her journey's dust must make her appear. "Thank you again, Marshal. I'm in your debt." William's expression softened slightly, revealing laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of a man capable of more than stern justice. "No debt between us, Miss Maxwell, just doing my duty." He tipped his hat and turned to leave. "Marshal," Virginia called after him, surprising herself. When he turned, she found herself momentarily at a loss for words. "Will I see you again before I depart tomorrow?" Something flickered in his eyes, interest, perhaps, or simply polite consideration. "I'll check on you in the morning, make sure you're fit to travel." With a final nod, he strode back toward the sheriff's office, leaving Virginia with the strangest feeling that her arrival in Willow Creek might prove more significant than she'd anticipated. Mrs. Henderson was everything the marshal had promised: motherly, efficient, and blessed with a keen eye that missed nothing. She took one look at Virginia's split lip and dusty appearance, and whisked her upstairs to the best available room, sending up hot water for bathing and a tray of beef stew that filled the air with savory aromas. "Marshal Westbrook doesn't often escort ladies to my establishment," the older woman remarked as she laid out clean towels. "Must have seen something special in you." Virginia focused on unpacking her nightgown, hoping the lamplight disguised her blush. "He was simply doing his job, Mrs. Henderson. Those men would have taken me if he hadn't intervened." The innkeeper clicked her tongue. "Territory's getting more dangerous by the day. What brings you out here alone, if you don't mind my asking? Most women travel with husbands or brothers." "I have neither," Virginia admitted, running her fingers over the worn leather of her father's journal, the reason for her journey. "My father passed last winter. He had mining interests near Tucson that need attending to." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, dear, but be careful in Tucson. Mining business is rough even for men, let alone a woman alone." After the older woman left, Virginia sank into the steaming bath, allowing herself to relax for the first time in days. As she washed away the dust and fear, Her thoughts drifted to the Marshal's steady blue gaze and the confidence with which he'd faced down her attackers. There had been something compelling about William Westbrook, a quiet strength that differed from the bombastic men she'd known back east. She dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. Her purpose in Arizona was clear: validate her father's mining claim, sell the property, and return to civilization. Romance had no place in her carefully constructed plans, especially with a man whose life was entangled with the dangers she hoped to escape. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the lace curtains of her room. Virginia dressed in her second-best traveling outfit, a practical navy blue ensemble that had weathered the journey reasonably well. She'd just finished pinning up her chestnut hair when a knock came at her door. Marshal Westbrook stood in the hallway, hat in hand and looking considerably more refreshed than when she'd last seen him. In daylight, she could better appreciate his features: the strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard, the intelligent eyes that seemed to assess everything in a single glance, and the smile lines that hinted at a man who found joy despite the harshness of his profession. "Good morning, Miss Maxwell. I trust you slept well," Virginia nodded, stepping back to invite him into the small sitting area of her room, leaving the door properly ajar for propriety's sake. "Very well, thank you. Have the men who attacked me been dealt with?" "They'll face a judge in Prescott next month," William confirmed, remaining standing though she gestured toward a chair. "They're part of a gang we've been tracking for some time, slavers who prey on travelers and sell their victims across the border." Virginia shivered despite the morning warmth. "Then I'm doubly grateful for your intervention." William studied her, his expression thoughtful. "About your journey to Tucson, I must continue today," she interjected, anticipating his concern. "My business cannot wait." "I understand, but I have information that might change your plans." His voice remained professional, but something in his tone put her on alert. "Two of my deputies rode in from the south early this morning. There was a flash flood that washed out the bridge at Coyote Creek. The road to Tucson is impassable for at least a week." Virginia felt the blood drain from her face. A week's delay could be disastrous. According to her father's papers, the claim needed to be validated by the end of the month or ownership would revert to the territory. "There must be another route," she insisted. William nodded slowly. "There is. An old trail that skirts the eastern foothills. It adds 3 days to the journey and passes through Apache territory." He watched her reaction carefully. "It's not a path I'd recommend for anyone traveling alone, especially now." "Especially now," Virginia echoed. "There's been trouble." The army moved several Apache families off their traditional lands last month. Some of the warriors have broken away from the reservation in protest. They've attacked 2 stagecoaches already. Virginia sank into a chair, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to wait in Willow Creek for a week, but traveling through hostile territory alone would be suicidal. "I have to reach Tucson by the 25th, she explained, deciding to trust him with at least part of the truth. "My father's mining claim must be registered by then, or I lose everything." William's expression remained unreadable as he considered her words. "I'm headed in that direction myself," he finally said, "delivering documents to the territorial court in Tucson. I plan to take the Eastern Trail tomorrow morning." Hope flickered in Virginia's chest. "Are you offering me an escort, Marshal? It would be safer than waiting here or traveling alone," he replied carefully. "But I should warn you, it'll be rough country, hard riding, and we'll need to make camp along the way. Not the sort of journey most Eastern ladies would find comfortable." Virginia lifted her chin, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "I believe I demonstrated yesterday that I'm not most Eastern ladies, Marshal Westbrook. If you're willing to allow me to accompany you, I accept your offer." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his features. "So you did, Miss Maxwell, so you did." He replaced his hat, tipping the brim slightly. "We'll leave at first light tomorrow. Pack only what you need. Will travel faster with less weight." After he departed, Virginia sat for a long moment, wondering if she'd made the right decision. William Westbrook was essentially a stranger, albeit one who had saved her life. Traveling alone with him for several days would raise eyebrows even in this frontier territory. But as she began sorting through her belongings, deciding what to bring and what to leave behind, Virginia realized she trusted the Marshal in a way she couldn't quite explain. Perhaps it was the respect he'd shown her, or the way he'd faced down her attackers without hesitation. Whatever the reason, she felt safer with the prospect of his company than without it. The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. Virginia purchased supplies from the general store, including dried beans, salt pork, and coffee. The shopkeeper, a friendly man named Harold, insisted on adding a small sack of hard candies to her purchases. Marshal Westbrook's got a sweet tooth he won't admit to, Harold confided with a wink. Might make the journey more pleasant for you both. Virginia accepted the gift with a smile, oddly touched by this glimpse into the Marshal's character. She returned to the hotel to find that William had arranged for her larger belongings to be stored safely until their return. Mrs. Henderson helped her pack her saddlebags efficiently, offering practical advice about desert travel that Virginia absorbed eagerly. The Marshal's a good man, the innkeeper said as they worked. Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Hasn't been the same since, threw himself into his work, takes the most dangerous assignments. First time I've seen him show concern for anyone beyond duty. Virginia paused in her folding, surprised by this revelation. He hasn't mentioned any of that, Mrs. Henderson shrugged. He wouldn't. Not one to burden others with his troubles. But you should know a man who's loved and lost like that. He's either closed his heart forever or is just waiting for something to remind him life's worth living. That night, Virginia lay awake in her comfortable hotel bed, thinking about the journey ahead and the enigmatic man who would be her companion. Outside her window, the small town settled into nighttime rhythms, piano music drifting from the saloon, occasional laughter, the steady tread of the night watchman passing below. Tomorrow she would leave this relative comfort for the wilderness, riding alongside a man whose quiet strength both intrigued and unsettled her. As sleep finally claimed her, Virginia wondered which category of widower William Westbrook belonged to the permanently heart-closed or the cautiously hopeful, and why the answer suddenly seemed to matter so much. Dawn had barely broken when Virginia made her way to the livery stable, a small leather satchel containing her essentials slung over her shoulder. She dressed practically for the journey in her sturdiest riding skirt, a simple blouse, and a short jacket that wouldn't impede movement in the saddle. Her hair was braided and pinned tightly to her head beneath a wide-brimmed hat that would offer protection from the relentless sun. William was already there, checking the cinch on a magnificent black stallion. Beside his mount stood her chestnut mare, saddled and ready with her provisions neatly packed. The Marshal looked up at her approach, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You're punctual," he observed, taking her satchel and securing it to her saddle. "That's good. We'll want to make the most of the daylight." Virginia stroked her mare's nose affectionately. "Ella and I are ready, though I confess this is my first extended journey through such territory." William nodded, his eyes assessing her practical attire with approval. "Stay close, do as I say, and we'll be fine." He paused, then added more gently, "You've got good instincts, Miss Maxwell. Trust them." They set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across the desert floor. William led them away from the main road almost immediately, following a trail visible only to his experienced eye. Virginia kept pace beside him when the terrain allowed, finding a comfortable silence between them broken only by his occasional comments about landmarks or directions. By midday, Willow Creek was far behind them, and the landscape had transformed into a rugged beauty that stole Virginia's breath. Towering saguaros stood sentinel against the vivid blue sky, while in the distance, red rock formations rose like ancient cathedrals from the desert floor. They stopped at a small spring to water the horses and rest during the worst heat of the day. Virginia gratefully dismounted, stretching her stiff limbs while William spread a small blanket in the shade of a mesquite tree. "You ride well," he commented, offering her his canteen. Not many city ladies could keep this pace. Virginia took a careful sip of the cool water. My father believed women should be capable. He taught me to ride, shoot, and manage accounts when other girls were learning needlepoint. Sounds like a progressive man. He was. Virginia's voice softened with memory. After my mother died, it was just the two of us. He said there was no point raising me to be ornamental when I'd need to be useful. William nodded, unwrapping bread and dried beef for their simple meal. My Ellen was like that, practical-minded. Could shoot as straight as any man and still make the finest apple pie in the territory. Virginia recognized the name of his deceased wife from Mrs. Henderson's revelation. She accepted the food he offered, watching him carefully. "How long were you married?" 7 years, he replied, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains. "Long enough to know what I had, not long enough to take it for granted." Something in his tone, not bitter but resigned, touched Virginia deeply. "And your work as a marshal, did that come before or after?" "After." William met her eyes directly. "I was a rancher before, had a small spread near Flagstaff. After I buried them, I couldn't stay there. The badge gave me purpose when I needed it most." Virginia nodded, understanding the need for purpose in the face of loss. "My father's mining claim is all I have left of him. The investors back east tried to buy me out for a fraction of its worth, claiming a woman couldn't possibly understand its value or manage its development." William's mouth curved slightly. "I take it you disagreed." Vehemently. Virginia smiled despite herself. "I may not know mining, but I know numbers, and I know when I'm being swindled." Their conversation flowed more easily after that, finding common ground in their shared experiences of loss and resilience. As they packed up to continue their journey, Virginia found herself watching the marshal's strong, capable hands as he adjusted her saddle, noticing the gentleness with which he handled both horses and supplies. The afternoon brought them deeper into the wilderness, the trail narrowing as it wound through increasingly rocky terrain. William grew more vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines and outcroppings that flanked their path. Virginia followed his example, her senses sharpening to the subtle sounds and movements around them. "We'll make camp in the canyon ahead," William said as the sun began its descent. "There's good water and defensible position." Virginia nodded, understanding the unspoken concern. They were entering territory where Apache scouts might be watching. Though many tribes maintained peaceful relations with settlers, the recent displacements had created understandable tensions. The canyon offered a natural shelter, with a small stream running along its floor and steep walls that would prevent surprise approach. William showed Virginia how to set up camp efficiently, appreciating her willingness to help with every task from gathering firewood to caring for the horses. As darkness fell, they sat beside a small, carefully banked fire, the flames casting flickering shadows across their faces. The night air carried a chill that made Virginia grateful for the coffee warming her hands. "May I ask you something, Marshal?" she ventured after a comfortable silence. William looked up from cleaning his revolver, his expression open. "William, please, and yes, you may." "William," she repeated, testing the familiarity. "Why did you offer to escort me? Surely delivering documents doesn't require such haste that you couldn't wait for the bridge repairs." He considered her question, setting aside his weapon and pouring himself more coffee. "The documents are important, but they could have waited." His eyes met hers across the fire. "I've seen what happens to people who travel these territories unprepared, especially women alone." Virginia sensed there was more he wasn't saying. "Is that the only reason?" William's gaze dropped to the flames, watching them dance for a long moment before answering. "No," he finally admitted. "When I saw you fighting those men, not giving up despite the odds. It reminded me that courage comes in many forms. I respected that." His honesty warmed her more than the fire. "Thank you for saying that and for being here." They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts and plans for their futures. Virginia learned that, beneath William's stoic exterior, lay a thoughtful man with unexpected depths, a love of literature, a dry wit, and a fierce commitment to justice that went beyond his badge. In turn, she told him of her dreams to use her father's legacy to build a life of independence, perhaps opening a school for girls where they could learn more than society deemed necessary. When they finally retired to their separate bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, Virginia found herself lying awake, listening to the night sounds and thinking about the man sleeping just a few yards away. There was something undeniably appealing about William Westbrook, a steadiness she'd rarely encountered in men before, combined with a respect for her capabilities that never felt condescending. She fell asleep wondering what might have happened if they'd met under different circumstances, in a different time or place, without the barriers of their separate worlds and responsibilities between them. Dawn brought a pearlescent light to the canyon, along with a new tension in William's bearing. As they prepared to depart, he checked and rechecked his weapons with methodical care. "We'll be crossing the most exposed section of the trail today," he explained, helping Virginia mount. "Keep your eyes open and your rifle ready. With luck, we'll see nothing but hawks and jackrabbits." The morning passed uneventfully, though Virginia noticed William's increasing vigilance as they climbed higher into the foothills. The scenery grew more spectacular with each mile verdant valleys nestled between towering cliffs, ancient petroglyphs etched into sun-baked rock faces, distant vistas that stretched to the horizon. Around midday, as they rounded a bend in the trail, William suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. Virginia pulled up beside him, following his gaze to the ridge above them where dust rose in small puffs. "Someone's up there," he said quietly, reaching for his field glass. After a moment of study, his expression grew grave. "Apache scouts, 3 of them, they're watching the trail." Virginia's heart quickened. "Are they hostile?" "Hard to tell from this distance." William replaced the glass in his saddlebag, "But we're not turning back. We'll continue forward, nice and steady. No sudden moves." They proceeded cautiously, the weight of unseen eyes following their progress. Virginia found herself unconsciously moving her horse closer to William's, drawing comfort from his calm presence. The attack came without warning, a whistling sound followed by an arrow embedding itself in the ground directly in front of William's horse. The stallion reared, but William controlled him masterfully, at the same time drawing his rifle from its scabbard. "Virginia, ride for those rocks," he commanded, pointing to a boulder formation ahead that would provide cover. She urged her mare forward, heart pounding as more arrows arced through the air around them. William fired a warning shot toward the ridge, not aiming to hit anyone but making their defense clear. Virginia reached the rocks first, dismounting quickly and pulling her rifle free as William thundered up behind her. They positioned themselves behind the largest boulder, horses protected behind them. Virginia's hands were steady as she checked her weapon, years of her father's training taking over despite her fear. "I count 5 warriors," William said, peering cautiously around the edge. "They've got us pinned for now, but they're not pressing the attack. What do they want?" Virginia asked, her voice remarkably calm to her own ears. "To determine if we're a threat, most likely, or to discourage us from traveling further." He glanced at her appraisingly. "You're handling this well." "Panic wouldn't improve our situation," she replied, though her pulse raced beneath her composed exterior. William's lips curved slightly. "No, it wouldn't." He considered their options, then made a decision. "I'm going to try something. These aren't renegades, they're wearing the bands of Chief Nashe's people. They're cautious, not openly aggressive." Before Virginia could question him, William stood slowly, keeping his rifle pointed downward. He raised his free hand in a gesture of peace, and called out in what she recognized as Apache language, halting but intelligible phrases that carried across the distance. For several tense moments, nothing happened. Then a single figure appeared on the ridge, tall and imposing. Words were exchanged, William's careful pronunciation met with rapid responses from the warrior above. "What's happening?" Virginia whispered when there was a pause in the conversation. "I've explained we're passing through, not hunting or settling, that we respect their territory." William kept his eyes on the Apache leader. "He wants to know why we travel this path instead of the main road." William called up again, gesturing occasionally toward Virginia. The exchange continued for several minutes, punctuated by long silences and careful consideration of words. Finally, William lowered his hand, turning to Virginia with visible relief. "They'll let us pass. The chief's son is curious about us, says a woman who rides like you, and a man who speaks their tongue, however poorly, are unusual travelers. That's good, Virginia ventured, still uncertain. William nodded. Very good, but there's a condition. We must visit their camp tonight, share a meal, and tell them news of the territorial government's plans. He studied her face. It would be dangerous to refuse, but I won't make this decision for you. Virginia drew a deep breath, weighing their options. The idea of entering an Apache camp voluntarily sent a thrill of apprehension through her, but she trusted William's judgment. If you believe it's safe, then I agree. The warrior on the ridge called down once more, and William responded before turning back to Virginia. We'll follow them. Keep your weapons visible, but don't appear threatening. Let me do the talking. The next hour passed in tense silence as they followed their Apache guides along hidden trails that wound deeper into the mountains than Virginia had anticipated. The landscape grew increasingly lush, with juniper and pine replacing the desert scrub as they climbed. By late afternoon, they arrived at a well-concealed encampment nestled in a verdant valley. Women paused in their work to watch the strangers approach, while children peeked curiously from behind their mothers' skirts. The atmosphere was cautious but not openly hostile. They were brought before an older man whose bearing marked him unmistakably as a leader. Chief Nashe studied them with penetrating black eyes, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. William dismounted and helped Virginia down, both of them standing respectfully before the chief. Again, William spoke in the Apache language, this time more formally. Virginia watched the interchange, fascinated by the subtle shifts in expression that passed between the two men. The chief welcomes us to share his fire, William translated quietly. His son, Running Fox, told him of our respectful approach. A younger warrior stepped forward, the same man who had spoken with them from the ridge. He examined them both with undisguised curiosity, particularly Virginia. He asks if you are my woman, William said, a hint of color touching his cheekbones. Virginia maintained her composure. What should I say? The truth is best, that we travel together by necessity and mutual respect. When William translated her answer, Running Fox smiled slightly, saying something that made the other warriors laugh. William's expression remained neutral, but Virginia detected a hint of embarrassment. What did he say? She pressed. That perhaps by journey's end, necessity and respect might grow into something more, William admitted reluctantly. Apache humor can be direct. Virginia felt heat rise to her face but managed a dignified nod to the younger warrior. The chief gestured for them to be seated, and women brought forward food, a stew of rabbit and wild vegetables that smelled surprisingly appetizing after their simple trail rations. As they ate, William and the chief conversed at length, with Running Fox occasionally joining in. Virginia observed the interaction carefully, noting the growing respect in the Apache men's expressions as William spoke. What are you telling them? She asked during a lull in the conversation. About the territorial governor's negotiations with the army, the planned reservation boundaries. William kept his voice low. They already know most of it, but they appreciate hearing it confirmed by someone who respects their concerns. The evening progressed with surprising warmth. After the meal, stories were shared around the fire, legends translated by William in a low voice for Virginia's benefit. She found herself entranced by the rich cultural heritage being shared with them, a perspective on the West that few white settlers ever experienced. Later, they were shown to a small shelter where they could rest for the night. As they settled their bedrolls on opposite sides of the space, Virginia voiced the question that had been forming throughout the evening. How did you learn their language? William was silent for a moment, arranging his saddle as a headrest. After Ellen and our son died, I wandered for a time, found myself near death from exposure in Apache territory. A medicine man named Tallwood found me, brought me to his family's camp. They could have killed me, but instead they healed me, taught me. His voice softened with memory. I stayed with them for almost a year. Virginia tried to imagine this strong, composed man in such a vulnerable state. That's why you understand their perspective on the land disputes. Yes. William's profile was illuminated by the dying firelight filtering through the shelter's entrance. "They saved more than my life, Virginia. They saved my reason for living when I'd lost it completely." The intimacy of his admission hung in the darkness between them. Virginia found herself wanting to cross the physical space separating them to offer comfort for old wounds that clearly still pained him. Instead, she said softly, "Thank you for sharing that with me." His eyes met hers across the shelter, holding a depth of emotion that made her breath catch. "You're easy to talk to. Easier than anyone I've known in a very long time." Morning brought a renewed sense of purpose to their journey. The Apache guides showed them a trail that would shave half a day from their travel time, a gesture of friendship that William clearly valued. Chief Neshe himself bid them farewell, clasping William's forearm in a warrior's grip and offering Virginia a small deerskin pouch containing herbs. "For strength on the journey," William translated. "It's a significant honor." As they rode away from the camp, Virginia felt a profound shift in her understanding of the territory and its people. The newspaper accounts back east portrayed the Apache as savages to be feared or pitied, but her experience revealed a proud, complex culture fighting to preserve their way of life against overwhelming odds. "They're remarkable people," she said as they crested a ridge that would take them back toward their original route. William nodded, a certain pride in his expression. "They live by a code as strict as any I've known. Honor, courage, family loyalty, values that would serve anyone well." Their pace quickened as they reached more familiar terrain, both aware that time remained precious if they were to reach Tucson by Virginia's deadline. The day passed in companionable conversation interspersed with comfortable silences, their shared experiences creating a bond that grew stronger with each passing mile. That evening, as they made camp beside a small stream, Virginia noticed William watching her with an intensity that sent warmth spreading through her chest. She was becoming increasingly aware of him not just as a protector and guide, but as a man, his strength tempered by gentleness, his authority balanced by respect. "What?" she finally asked, self-conscious under his steady gaze. William seemed to debate with himself before answering. "I was just thinking that you're nothing like I expected when I first saw you being dragged from that wagon." Virginia tilted her head curiously. "What did you expect? A frightened Eastern lady who'd demand to be escorted back to civilization immediately?" His expression softened. "Instead, you've faced every challenge with courage and adaptability. You've earned my admiration, Virginia Maxwell." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "And you've earned mine, William Westbrook. Few men would see a woman as a capable partner rather than a burden to be protected." "Few women would prove themselves so capable," he countered with a smile that transformed his features, erasing years of care from his face. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of mutual respect evolving into deeper feeling. Virginia found herself watching the firelight play across his features, noting the strength in his hands as he prepared their evening meal, appreciating the quiet competence that defined everything he did. When their fingers brushed as he passed her a tin cup of coffee, the contact sent a spark of awareness through her that had nothing to do with the hot beverage. William's eyes met hers, and she knew he'd felt it too, this unexpected connection growing between them. Neither spoke of it directly, but their conversation that evening flowed more easily, touching on hopes and dreams they'd shared with few others. Virginia found herself laughing more than she had in years, delighted by William's dry wit and thoughtful perspectives. As they prepared to retire for the night, William hesitated beside the fire, looking up at the star-filled sky. "We should reach Tucson by midday tomorrow if we make an early start." Virginia nodded, suddenly reluctant to think about their journey ending. "Yes, I suppose we should." "What will you do after you register your claim?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I had planned to sell it and return east," she admitted. "But now—" She trailed off, realizing her certainty had wavered. "The territory has shown me aspects I never anticipated." William studied her face in the firelight. "It's a hard land, but an honest one. It shapes people, reveals their true nature in ways more civilized places never could." "I've noticed that." Virginia said softly, thinking of how this journey had revealed facets of William's character and her own that might never have emerged in drawing rooms or city streets. They fell silent, each contemplating the impending conclusion of their shared adventure and what might lie beyond it. Virginia retired to her bedroll with a curious mixture of anticipation and regret swirling in her heart. True to William's prediction, they crested the final ridge overlooking Tucson just before noon the following day. The town sprawled below them, considerably larger than Willow Creek, with adobe buildings glowing golden in the midday sun and the territorial courthouse standing prominently near the center. "We made it," Virginia said, a complex emotion coloring her voice. William nodded, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the destination they'd worked so hard to reach. "Your father's claim will be secure by sundown." They rode down into the town, drawing curious glances from passers-by, a dusty marshal and a travel-worn lady clearly finishing a substantial journey together. William guided them to a respectable hotel near the courthouse, dismounting and helping Virginia down with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "I need to deliver my documents to Judge Hollister," he said, as a stable boy took charge of their horses. "I'll escort you to the mining registry office afterward." Virginia nodded, suddenly uncertain now that they had reached civilization and its accompanying proprieties. "Thank you. I'll freshen up and be ready when you return." In her hotel room, Virginia washed away the trail dust and changed into her last clean outfit, a bottle green traveling suit that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. As she pinned up her hair, she found herself wondering what William would think of her more polished appearance, then chided herself for the girlish thought. Yet when he knocked on her door an hour later, the appreciation in his eyes as he took in her transformation sent a pleased flush to her cheeks. William himself had cleaned up impressively, his tan duster brushed free of dust, his badge gleaming on his vest, his sandy hair neatly combed. "You look." He began, then seemed to think better of whatever he'd planned to say. "Are you ready to secure your father's legacy?" The mining registry office was housed in a small brick building adjacent to the courthouse. Inside, clerks moved efficiently among stacks of documents and maps detailing the territory's mineral wealth. William's presence and obvious authority smoothed their path through the bureaucratic process, his quiet insistence ensuring Virginia received fair treatment despite being a woman in a traditionally male domain. By late afternoon, the necessary paperwork was complete. Virginia stood on the office steps holding the official document that validated her ownership of the Maxwell silver mine, her father's last gift to her, now legally protected. "How does it feel?" William asked. Watching her examine the papers, Virginia smiled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "Like fulfilling a promise and gaining possibilities I hadn't considered before." They walked slowly back toward the hotel, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the dusty street. Neither mentioned what would happen next, though the question hung between them. "I should check in at the marshal's office," William finally said as they reached the hotel entrance. Would you care to join me for dinner this evening?" The formal invitation, so different from their shared meals beside campfires, brought a smile to Virginia's lips. "I would like that very much." William's answering smile transformed his face. 7 o'clock then, there's a decent restaurant near the plaza." As he walked away, Virginia found herself watching his retreating figure, admiring the confidence in his stride and the breadth of his shoulders beneath the worn duster. In just a few days, this man had shifted from stranger to protector to something far more complicated, someone whose company she would genuinely miss when their paths inevitably diverged, or would they diverge? The thought caught her by surprise. She'd come to Arizona with clear intentions to settle her father's affairs and return east. Yet something had changed during their journey together, not just her feelings toward William, but her sense of what she wanted from life. The territorial dinner was unlike any Virginia had experienced, neither the formal affairs of St. Louis society nor the rustic meals of their trail journey. The restaurant offered surprisingly sophisticated fare in a setting that blended frontier practicality with attempts at refinement. White tablecloths covered rough-hewn tables, while kerosene lamps cast a warm glow over the varied clientele. William arrived precisely on time, wearing a clean shirt and string tie that suggested he'd made an effort for the occasion. His eyes warmed appreciatively as he took in Virginia's appearance. She had changed into her one remaining clean dress, a deep blue ensemble that emphasized her slender waist and brought out the rich chestnut highlights in her upswept hair. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm to escort her to their table. Virginia accepted it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric of his sleeve. "Thank you. This is quite different from sharing jerky beside a campfire. Better or worse?" he asked with the hint of a smile. "Different," she repeated diplomatically, though privately she thought their campfire meals, for all their simplicity, had offered a freedom and intimacy this more formal setting lacked. Once seated, they fell into easy conversation, discussing the success of her claim registration and William's meeting with the territorial judge. Virginia found herself watching his expressions, the way his hands moved as he spoke, the rare but transformative smile that occasionally illuminated his features. "Have you decided what you'll do with the mine?" William asked as they enjoyed surprisingly good steaks with local vegetables. Virginia hesitated, turning her wine glass slowly between her fingers. "I'm reconsidering my original plan. The registry clerk mentioned that silver prices are expected to rise significantly in the coming months. It might be wiser to maintain ownership and hire a manager to oversee operations." William nodded thoughtfully. "That would require staying in the territory, at least temporarily." "Yes," she agreed, meeting his gaze directly. "I find that prospect less daunting than I once did." Something flickered in his blue eyes' hope, perhaps, though he maintained his composure. "The territory grows on some people, gets into their blood. Or perhaps it's the people one meets here," Virginia suggested softly, her heart beating faster as she ventured into more personal territory. William set down his fork, his full attention on her face. "Virginia," whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the arrival of the restaurant owner, a boisterous man clearly delighted to have a U.S. Marshal dining in his establishment. By the time they extracted themselves from his enthusiastic conversation about the territory's future, the moment had passed, though a new awareness hummed between them. After dinner, William suggested a walk through the town plaza, where the cooling evening air offered relief from the day's heat. They strolled slowly beneath cottonwood trees strung with paper lanterns, their conversation turning to more personal matters: Virginia's childhood in St. Louis, William's early years on a family ranch in Colorado. "What would you have done if you hadn't become a marshal?" Virginia asked as they paused beside a small fountain at the plaza's center. William considered the question, watching the water sparkle in the lamplight. "I always thought I'd raise horses. Had started breeding some fine stock before." He trailed off, the old pain briefly visible before he continued. "That dream got set aside, but lately I've been thinking about it again." "Why lately?" Virginia asked, though something in her heart already knew the answer. William turned to face her fully, his expression open in a way she hadn't seen before. "Because for years, I couldn't imagine a future worth planning for. Just the next assignment, the next outlaw, the next day. But recently," he hesitated, then continued with quiet certainty. "Recently, I've been reminded there might be more to life than just surviving it." Virginia felt her breath catch at the sincerity in his voice. "I understand that feeling. Since my father died, I've been focused solely on fulfilling his wishes, preserving his legacy. I forgot to consider what I might want for myself." "And what do you want, Virginia?" William asked softly, his gaze holding hers. The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Virginia found herself standing at a crossroads: the safe, predictable path back to Eastern society, or something new and uncertain but potentially far more fulfilling. "I want." She began, then summoned her courage to continue. "I want not to leave tomorrow. I want to see more of this territory that's shown me both its dangers and its beauty. And I want to know if what I've felt growing between us these past days is something that could flourish, given time and care." William's expression softened, relief and hope transforming his features. Slowly, with the caution of a man unaccustomed to reaching for happiness, he took her hand in his. "I've been telling myself not to hope for that," he admitted. "That once we reached Tucson, you'd continue with your plans and I'd return to my duties. That whatever connection we found on the trail was merely circumstance." Virginia shook her head, tightening her fingers around his. "I don't believe that. What I feel when I'm with you, the sense of being truly seen and respected, that's not circumstance, William. That's rare and valuable." He stepped closer, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "Since Ellen died, I never thought I'd find someone who made me want to build a future again. But you, your courage, your determination, your heart, you've awakened possibilities I'd buried years ago." The plaza around them faded into insignificance as Virginia leaned slightly into his touch. "Then perhaps we both have discoveries still to make in this territory." William's smile was tender as he leaned down, pausing just short of her lips to whisper, "May I?" Virginia's answer was to close the remaining distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with the emotion they'd held in check throughout their journey. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as she reached up to touch his face, learning the contours of his jaw beneath her fingertips. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, William rested his forehead against hers. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you fighting those bandits. No one should look that beautiful while being that fierce." Virginia laughed softly, joy bubbling through her veins. "And I think I started falling for you when you faced down 3 men to save a woman you didn't even know." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, making plans that would have seemed impossible just days before. Virginia would stay in Tucson to oversee the initial development of her mine, while William would complete his current assignment before requesting a transfer to the territorial office in the same city. "It won't be easy," he cautioned as they reached her hotel room door. "Mining towns are rough places, and a woman owner will face skepticism at best, hostility at worst." Virginia smiled, confidence straightening her spine. "Then it's fortunate I'll have the territory's most respected marshal to advise me, though I suspect I might surprise a few people on my own." William's answering smile held pride and admiration. "Of that, Miss Maxwell, I have absolutely no doubt." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Until tomorrow." As Virginia prepared for bed that night, she found herself standing at the window, looking out at the starlit landscape that had so quickly become meaningful to her. The Arizona territory was indeed harsh and demanding, but it offered a freedom she had never known in the East, the freedom to define herself by her own courage and capabilities rather than society's expectations. And William. Her thoughts lingered on the marshal whose strength was matched by his gentleness, whose respect had turned to something deeper during their shared journey. She had come to Arizona seeking only to honor her father's legacy, but had found instead the possibility of a future richer than any she had imagined. The following weeks proved William's warnings accurate. Establishing herself as the owner of the Maxwell silver mine required Virginia to overcome prejudice, skepticism, and occasional outright hostility. Yet with each challenge she faced, her confidence grew, bolstered by William's unwavering support and her own developing knowledge of the mining industry. She hired a foreman with impeccable references, invested in improved safety equipment that quickly paid dividends in worker loyalty, and negotiated favorable terms with the smelting operation in Tucson. By the end of her second month, production had increased by 15%, and the Maxwell mine was developing a reputation as one of the best-run operations in the territory. William, true to his word, arranged a transfer to Tucson, though his duties still took him away periodically to handle difficulties in outlying settlements. Each return brought a deepening of their relationship, shared meals, long rides through the desert landscape he was teaching her to love, and increasingly passionate embraces that tested the bounds of propriety. 4 months after their arrival in Tucson, William took Virginia to a ridge overlooking a verdant valley where a small ranch house stood beside a corral containing several fine horses. The autumn sunlight gilded the landscape, turning the distant mountains to purple and gold. "What do you think?" he asked as they dismounted, watching her take in the scene below. Virginia turned to him questioningly. "It's beautiful, but I don't understand." William took her hands, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. "I bought it last week. There's good grazing land, a reliable spring, and room for expansion." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Room for a future, our future if you want it." Understanding dawned as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, a silver band set with a modest diamond that caught the sun's rays. "Virginia Maxwell, you came into my life fighting, and you've reminded me every day since what it means to live with purpose and passion." William's voice was steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I love your courage, your intelligence, and your heart. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy rose within her like a desert sunrise, brilliant and transformative. "Yes," she whispered, then louder with certainty. "Yes, William Westbrook, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that expressed everything words could not: the gratitude for second chances, the wonder of finding love when neither expected it, the promise of a shared future in the territory that had brought them together. Their wedding took place the following spring in the garden of their new home, with a curious mixture of guests in attendance: territorial officials, miners from Virginia's operation, several Apache friends including Running Fox, who had become a regular visitor, and even Mrs. Henderson, who traveled from Willow Creek for the occasion. As they exchanged vows beneath an arch of desert wildflowers, Virginia thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the terror of being dragged from her wagon by bandits to the joy of building a new life with the man who had saved her that day. William's hands were warm and sure as they held hers, his voice steady as he pledged his love and fidelity. When he kissed her as his wife for the first time, the cheers of their assembled friends seemed to echo across the valley that would be their home. Later, as they danced beneath lantern light while the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, William pulled her close to whisper in her ear. "Do you remember what Running Fox said when we first met him, about necessity and respect growing into something more?" Virginia smiled up at her husband, love warming her heart. "He was wiser than we knew. The Apache have a saying," William continued, spinning her gently across the makeshift dance floor. "The journey that tests you most leads to the place your spirit belongs." "Then I'm grateful for every difficult step," Virginia replied, her fingers tightening around his, "for they led me exactly where I was meant to be." As the celebration continued around them, Virginia and William stood at the center of the home and life they were creating together, a life neither had imagined before fate and courage brought them together on a dusty trail in the Arizona territory, where a marshal's command to let her go had set them both free to find a love as vast and promising as the western horizon. Years later, visitors to the Westbrook Ranch would often remark on the unusual partnership between the silver mine owner and the former marshal. They would observe the three children running wild and free across the property, the thriving horse breeding operation, and the school for local children, both settler and Apache, that Virginia had established on their land. What these visitors couldn't see was the foundation upon which this success was built: the memory of a fateful day when a woman's courage and a man's intervention created the first thread in a tapestry of shared strength, mutual respect, and enduring love that would be passed down through generations of Westbrooks, becoming as much a part of the Arizona landscape as the mountains that witnessed its beginning.